Dr. William Samoei Ruto, the President of the Republic and Commander-in-Chief, Professor Kithure Kindiki, the Deputy President of the Republic, Your Excellency, Prime Cabinet Secretary, Dr. Musalia Mudavadi, esteemed members of the Cabinet of the Republic, my dear colleagues, Principal Secretaries, different members of government here present, my colleagues from the State Department of Foreign Affairs. Your Excellency, this morning we are filled with joy. The joy of sharing this space with you is something we don't take for granted. We requested you, Your Excellency, to join us on this occasion because we are cognizant of your responsibility. As stipulated in the Constitution in Article 131, by which you are head of government and also head of state. 2 days ago, Your Excellency, Prime Cabinet Secretary hosted a validation meeting in this very space. It is a meeting that brought together a wide range of Kenyans to reflect on the draft foreign policy of the Republic that we have been developing since July. Your Excellency, 12 consultative meetings have taken place with different sectors of our society, and based on their views, we now have a draft document that was validated under the leadership of the Prime Cabinet Secretary. And so today's meeting, Your Excellency, is really quite brief because the intention of it is to hear the vision of the #1 diplomat of the Republic of Kenya in the person of His Excellency, the President. Because that's who you are, sir. You are the embodiment of the Republic in its relations with states and multilateral organizations around the world. You are the voice of Kenya. You are the #1 marketer of the Republic. And therefore, it is important, Your Excellency, that we hear what your thoughts are before we finalize this policy. And so, Your Excellency, my role this morning is really quite basic. Allow me to, because I have a presentation later on, allow me, Your Excellency, to ask my dear colleague and sister Roslyn Njogu to come and make her observations, and then that will allow us, Your Excellency, to move forward. Thank you very much. Put our hands together for Roslyn.
Thank you, my brother here, Singoei. His Excellency, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya and Commander-in-Chief. His Excellency, Professor Kithure Kindiki, Deputy President and my teacher. His Excellency Musalia Mudavadi, Waziri Mkuu and our boss. Many Excellencies, Cabinet Secretaries, my colleague PSAs, the chair of the Committee for Defense, Intelligence and Foreign Relations, Honorable Koech, and the chair for the Diaspora and Migrant Affairs Committee, Honorable Haika. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues from the ministry, ambassadors, excellencies, good morning. Good morning. Mine is really very small, Your Excellency. It's to ask the question, what does a well-done foreign policy do? How do we feel, touch, and understand a well-done foreign policy? I'm going to talk about 3 things quickly that foreign policy has done for us in the embodiment of the State Department for Diaspora Affairs. The diaspora pillar has always been a pillar of the foreign policy of Kenya. But giving it flesh, giving it budget, and giving it energy has allowed us to do many things to grow our diplomacy. It has allowed us to protect the 4 million Kenyans who live abroad has allowed us to run evacuation programs when those Kenyans have been in distress, such as in Sudan, Your Excellency, where we're the first country to get our citizens home, such as the ongoing evacuation out of Lebanon, where so far we have received 300 distressed Kenyans from Lebanon, and that process is ongoing. But also it has allowed us to extend protection through ensuring documentation is done for our diaspora everywhere, including running the Mobile Consular Services program that has allowed us to serve Kenyans in 175 different cities in the 2 years that we have been in business. Your Excellency, what does a well-done foreign policy do as far as diaspora remittances are concerned? It allows us to put money, programs, and people to create an incentive framework for remittances. And Your Excellency, I'm happy to announce that we see an upward trend as far as the remittances that come from this country. We last year reported $4.2 billion US, which, as you know, is higher than the remittance, the foreign exchange that comes from tea, coffee, tourism, and I'm not trying to start anything with the PSAs for tourism, for agriculture, and so on. But Your Excellency, that number is critical because it comes from less than 4 million people sending money in small ticket sizes to their homes. Your Excellency, it allows us to think about people who have been on the margins and how to keep them connected to their homeland. Countries that have supported their diasporas have done well. And we have examples everywhere, from Ireland, from Israel, from India, and so on, and we can see the work that has been done by those diasporas. Ensuring that our foreign policy has legs and has had diaspora diplomacy at its heart has ensured then that we've been able to keep our diaspora connected and help them achieve more and more of their rights. Your Excellency, I'm currently hosting a delegation from the diaspora who are here to meet with various members of Bunge to talk about electoral law reform and to see how they can take even more part in the work that we do. So, Your Excellency, this process of redoing the foreign policy of Kenya and doing it in such an open way that allows various stakeholders to speak to it will give us fresh impetus, will allow us to feel, touch this thing that is called diplomacy and this thing that is called the foreign policy. I want to thank you, Your Excellency, and I want to thank my colleague, P.S. Singoei and Waziri Wetu, Dr. Musalia Mudavadi, for the leadership on this process, and to say that, Your Excellency, we look forward to hearing the direction from you and to having a foreign policy that we all will be able to support and get behind. Asante sana.
Another round of applause for P.S. Roslin. On your programs, Your Excellency, there is a presentation which is captured as a video presentation. I think somebody at State House was a bit mischievous, thinking that I would be away and that we would speak via video. But I'm here personally, and so I'd like to make a quick presentation. May I ask our ICT people to just put up the presentation, please? I think the presentation, first and foremost, Your Excellency, like I said, is summative of our foreign policy draft that has been developed consultatively by an interministerial team. It is important to say that it's not been developed merely by a team from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because our understanding from the word go is that this is a whole of government business. And so at the beginning of July, when the Prime Cabinet Secretary asked me to initiate this process, Your Excellency, we put together an interministerial team. And I want to ask members of the technical committee that was in charge of this review process to just be upstanding so that we can recognize you. They were led by Ambassador Kiruthu, who is the Deputy Director General for bilateral within the ministry. Thank you very much. Let's put our hands together. In summary, Your Excellency, that's the outline of the presentation. We start with our diplomatic footprint. The formation or the formulation process for this policy, like I mentioned, was consultative. We will outline the draft policy. We will reflect on the 2014 Kenya foreign policy pillars, the focus areas of the current proposed policy, how we intend to implement it, to monitor and to evaluate it, and the next steps. Next slide, please. Your Excellency, that is our diplomatic footprint. 60 years down the line, since the commencement of our diplomacy, we now have footprints in well over 68 geographies. You can see the spread is largely in Africa, 29, 15 in Europe, 6 in the Americas, 9 in Asia, 9 in the Middle East. I think in the Americas, actually, it's going to change in about 2 weeks because there's a 7th one coming up, which is a consulate we are setting up in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. But Your Excellency, this footprint has been put here for a reason, because when you compare it with our neighbors, our footprint, given our ambition, is still inadequate. Now, our friends in South Africa have 103 missions abroad. With the kind of mandate you have given us, Your Excellency, including on diaspora affairs, including on candidature, it increasingly becomes evident to us that we do not have sufficient coverage. And so part of the conversation we need to have is whether the coverage that we have is sufficient. Next slide, please. The journey we started in July, Your Excellency, has led us along a path of consultation. We have consulted widely, reached experts in maritime affairs, in health, in peace and security in academia, in the media, in civil society, including in the judiciary. And so, Your Excellency, it is our view that we have undertaken consultative processes that are compliant with the Constitution of the Republic. If you notice, Your Excellency, it's only one major consultation that is still outstanding to our mind, which is the consultation with yourself, namely this particular forum. Next slide, please. So we've come up with a 6-chapter document, a document that speaks in chapter 1 on our prioritized national interests and values. And the point here, Your Excellency, is that the reason for foreign policy is the promotion of the national interest, the fostering of our national interest. And part of the conversation we need to have is what is the national interest? An examination of our Constitution suggests certain elements that fit into the matrix of the national interest. In particular, Article 138 of the Constitution speaks to the question of territorial integrity and stability, the protection of the commonwealth, of the citizenry and the citizenry's well-being. It speaks to the entitlements of the citizens, namely their rights and their freedoms, amongst others. And these are some of the interests that are prioritized that we need to protect using our foreign policy. Your Excellency, the 2nd chapter examines the operating environment and basically asks why are we reviewing the 2014 policy. And in examining the operating environment, it's obvious, Your Excellency, that many changes have taken place in the operating environment. On the economic sphere, we are dealing with complex challenges around fiscal challenges and debt. We are dealing with challenges around climate. We are dealing with opportunities around the demographic shift and many others. But increasingly also we are dealing with not just a resurgence, but a strengthening of agency on the part of various organs of the state and also citizens. Parliament is playing a role in foreign policy, the judiciary, county governments, academia, private sector, civil society. The media is asking questions, young people are asking questions, and that's why we're having this conversation. Additionally, when you look at things from an international lens, it is evident, Your Excellency, that the fabric of the global order, the fabric of the international order is considerably punctured. The parchment by which global order is sustained is threatened. And the key question revolves around, do we repair this parchment? Do we repair this fabric or reform it? Or do we replace it? And Your Excellency has been at the center of conversations around reform of the international architecture, and we are very anxious, Your Excellency, to hear your thoughts in that respect. Your Excellency, the third chapter then considers the tools of diplomacy, the tools of foreign policy, namely bilateral and multilateral engagements, but also an emerging concept known as plurilateral engagements, which is really about the realization that because the parchment of the international order is ruptured, because multilateralism is not delivering as it ought, interest-based institutions are beginning to cohere. They may not be as structured, but you can begin to see an emergence of new institutional formations, and we will have that discussion. The fourth chapter, Your Excellency, then presents what our foreign policy options are, and then we consider in chapter 5 and 6 implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. Next slide, please. Your Excellency, this is a fairly important slide because it asks whether Kenya has a foreign policy doctrine. What is Kenya's foreign policy doctrine? What is our foreign policy philosophy? Do we have a default position to guide our interactions at the international level? How do we want to project the country? That is really the conversation that's taking place in that particular chapter. And the proposition here, Your Excellency, is that we are guided by a strong belief that our future is very much linked to the stability, security of our republic, and the common heritage of all of us. So this sense of Kenya existing within a community of nations is set out. And that linked to the stability and prosperity of our neighbors in East Africa and the rest of the continent lies Kenya's stability. Your Excellency, we've been guided since independence by very clear principles. The principle of good neighborliness. This is something we should be proud of. Kenya is a good neighbor within the region. The idea that we do not interfere with the internal affairs of other countries. The idea that we believe that we can resolve our issues regionally, guided by the Pan-African spirit. The view that we will act fairly and reciprocally with others or towards others. The idea, Your Excellency, that we will welcome those in distress through our humanitarianism, and that's the reason why Kenya is a big refugee hosting country. Today, we are hosts to more than 700,000 refugees around the country. More fundamentally, Your Excellency, is a principle of non-alignment. Because we now live in a fairly complex geography globally, our non-alignment has served us. One of the principles that is not captured there, Your Excellency, which I hope we can be able to discuss, is the fact that Kenya's recognition of other states is contingent upon the recognition of those states by the United Nations. And so where there is a tension between our recognition of the state at the regional level, we look mainly at the extent to which the United Nations has recognized those states. So for example, the state of Palestine that has recently been now recognized by well over 146 countries, that's a major issue that we need to consider as a country. And so, certain other states, including those that aspire to be states, such as, Kosovo, such as Western Sahara, and others that are not really recognized under the rubric of the UN, even though in certain contexts within the AU system, they may have some form of recognition. I think Kenya's position has been that until and unless we have affirmative recognition from the United Nations, then we do not give them that recognition. Your Excellency, like I said, since independence, Kenya has successfully forged mutually beneficial alliances with both the West and the East. And again, going back to the idea of recognition, Your Excellency, I think this is also a good place to mention one other country, which is the idea of Taiwan. And the reason why Kenya stands for the proposition of one China policy is because when you look at Taiwan, it is recognized only by 8 countries. So it hasn't met the threshold of recognition. And so with regard to, our commitment to the one China policy, it's actually based on a very solid principle. Next slide, please. Your Excellency, that's the 2014 policy proposition in summary. If you look at that slide, what does that tell you? We envisioned in 2014 that we would build the house of foreign policy. This is like a house sitting on 5 pillars. It's very clear, it's very linear, if you like. It's stable also. But it's unbending, because if you remove any of those pillars, will the house stand? And the key question is, does our policy stand necessarily on any one pillar? And part of the criticism around this approach has been that, that the policy projection in this manner sort of makes Kenya's approach very, very rigid. There's little view of the interaction between different pillars, and therefore one doesn't get the full view of how we drive our policy. But nevertheless, Your Excellency, this policy framework has served us since independence, because we have been leaders in the peace frontier, and increasingly from 2002, we have been running on an economic diplomacy trajectory, as well as environmental trajectory, diaspora, as well as cultural diplomacy. Next slide, please. The next slide essentially captures, and I think it's a bit repetitive because we've discussed this, because in reviewing the foreign policy, I think we asked ourselves, what are the determinants, what are the drivers of this review process? And like I mentioned earlier, we looked at the external environment, the domestic environment, the external environment, our national ambitions captured in the bottom-up economic transformation agenda and Vision 2030. And we also looked, Your Excellency, at the demands from the bottom, from non-state actors and other institutions, all of which collectively influence the strategic direction of our diplomatic efforts. But more fundamentally, like I mentioned, since 2014, many global shifts have been witnessed and continue to shape foreign policies world over, including Kenya. Most fundamentally, Your Excellency, I think you recall in 2020 with COVID, the world suddenly turned its attention on the impact of health and the dangers that public health can pose on peace and security. And therefore, the nexus between global health and peace began to be examined. The other important factor in that regard, Your Excellency, is technology, the ubiquity of technology, and the fact that technology has now horizontalized access to information. The information available to government is more or less the information that is available to the citizen. And that has it has democratized the information space, but it has also created considerable challenges. Your Excellency, we have emerging areas of diplomacy, including parliamentary, like I mentioned, Parliament is playing a very important role. The judiciary also in the judicial interpretation of the law is developing areas of diplomacy. The ocean is becoming a very important site for diplomacy. We have done a lot of conference-related diplomacy and public diplomacy. Your Excellency, we have, like I said, received views from all those actors, and we continue to evaluate and adapt our foreign policy for relevance and effectiveness. Next slide, please. So, Your Excellency, this is sort of the way we envision the new focus areas of our foreign policy. So away from the house of diplomacy, the house of foreign policy that we had in 2014, I don't know what this chart sort of triggers in our minds. To me, I see a leopard skin in the variegated colors that you see. Is that to say that because the world has become even more complex and more unpredictable, we will be more adaptive, more agile, maybe even a little more camouflaged in order to deal with the habitats that is a world that is a lot more complex? Or is it like some people have said, that this now looks like a plane that is about to take off, with global sustainability as the cockpit and the whole of government as the tail, and the two ends of bilateralism and multilateralism being sort of the wings that will enable our diplomacy to take off even much more strongly into the future. But again, Your Excellency, these are the focus areas of our diplomacy. The idea really being that we have tried to capture the non-linearity of the environment. We have also sought to capture the interactions between, for example, the diaspora and our socio-cultural diplomacy. The role that our diaspora could play in global governance and in multilateralism. But all of it, Your Excellency, is still anchored on the idea of driving the national interest. The hypothesis of this foreign policy is to argue that all these factors play a dynamic and interactive role in the furtherance of our foreign policy, resting on the idea that it will be driven by the whole of government, tapping and taking advantage of both our bilateral relations, which is mainly driven by our missions abroad and the missions that we host here, as well as the institutions of multilateralism that exist. Next slide, please. What we have in the next slides, Your Excellency, are really a breakdown of each of those areas, and I will not really take so much time in them. It is obvious, Your Excellency, that Kenya is a champion on peace and security. And this particular pillar, Your Excellency, or this particular focus area aims to safeguard Kenya's sovereignty and territorial integrity, preserve democracy and fundamental human rights, and ensure the prosperity and well-being of our people. Your Excellency, the bottom-up economic transformation focuses heavily on the need to expand our economy and the opportunities available to our people, and that is why we have economic and commercial diplomacy, which seeks to achieve robust economic and commercial engagements in order to secure Kenya's socio-economic development and prosperity with a broad aim of becoming an upper middle income and industrialized nation. Your Excellency, you have prioritized intra-African trade and regional economic integration while strengthening trade and commercial engagements globally. In this area, Your Excellency, of economic and commercial diplomacy, we have sites of trade and investment, tourism, creative economy, conferencing, amongst others. Thirdly, Your Excellency, the issue around sustainable oceans. Let's move to the next slide. We argue that Kenya will strengthen her position as a regional and global leader in oceans and blue economy and contribute meaningfully to global efforts in ocean governance. The main focus here will be promotion of sustainable development and management of the oceans and blue economy sector, enhancing maritime shipping, logistics, safety and security, promoting coastal and marine tourism. Your Excellency, Kenya will explore and develop ocean resources, protect marine and domain and boundaries, combat threats within the maritime sphere, enhance cooperation, and contribute to equitable sharing of oceans and marine resources and benefits. Next slide, please. Your Excellency, the focus of our policy will continue in the direction of enhancing our engagement around global governance and multilateral diplomacy, by which we will seek to provide proactive leadership in global governance by promoting equitable representation, multilateralism, and strategic collaboration to address emerging challenges and safeguard national interest. Kenya will continue to advocate for a more representative, fairer, and equitable international system that incorporates, reflects, and amplifies the voices of the Global South. Your Excellency, we will continue to work on the promotion of consensus building, respect for international law, and a rule-based international order. Next slide, please. On environmental and climate change diplomacy, Your Excellency, Kenya is a champion when it comes to matters climate change, because our energy security, Your Excellency, is predicated on green energy by and large. And when it comes to the environment, Your Excellency, Kenya is at the heart of environmental diplomacy by way of hosting UNEP and UN Habitat. And so the aim here is to promote global environmental sustainability through the preservation of natural resources, effective international collaboration, robust policy frameworks, and innovative strategies that support climate adaptation, biodiversity protection, and sustainable development. And we will seek to showcase our credentials as a global leader on environmental and climate change issues and renewable energy. On science and tech and innovation, Your Excellency, the aim here is to integrate various forms of STI to build a robust ecosystem to achieve Kenya's national interests and position the country as a key player in global technological discourse. Your Excellency, we will promote partnerships to support cutting-edge technologies, including AI, to create jobs, spur economic growth, and improve the welfare and living standards of Kenyans. We shall leverage on Kenya's commitment to international collaborations and partnerships aimed at attracting critical investments and fostering the exchange of knowledge for addressing global challenges. Your Excellency, the last two pillars are diaspora diplomacy, which my sister has spoken to quite a great deal, hinged on a conceptual framework that protects, engages, and empowers the Kenyan diaspora community to enhance their prosperity and that of the nation, and to leverage on diaspora to promote Kenya's interests abroad, including employment in strategic positions in regional and international organizations. On social-cultural diplomacy, the aim of which is to harness social-cultural opportunities in the international arena, especially through the promotion of social values, cultural heritage, and endowments as tools to build relationships, foster understanding, and influence other nations. The focus here, Your Excellency, will be on cultural heritage, sports, education, and global health diplomacy. In relation to the implementation and the monitoring and evaluation of this policy, Your Excellency, this is predicated on an efficient and professional foreign service, working in collaboration with other MDAs through a whole of government and society approach, both at the national and county governments. A monitoring and evaluation policy will be guided by the National Monitoring and Evaluation Framework. Your Excellency, other documents have been prepared to bolster this draft policy. A cabinet memo will come before you. And to implement the policy much more coherently, Your Excellency, it is proposed, and I know the Prime Cabinet Secretary will speak to this, that a sessional paper on Kenya's foreign policy be elaborated. We are also undertaking further reviews of Foreign Service Act 2021 and development of foreign service regulations. Your Excellency, in terms of the next steps, we intend, with your permission and your blessing, to launch the Kenya foreign policy on the 2nd of December 2024. Thereafter, or rather, we intend to launch the drafts, and then thereafter, that draft will go before Cabinet, which will give rise to the development of a sessional paper, a revised act, and foreign service regulations. Your Excellency, last, we will engage in a sensitization exercise by which we will engage Kenyans on the new Kenya's foreign policy. Your Excellency, that is in a nutshell the draft foreign policy that we seek to present to you